Welcome. Welcome to our essay class number 2. So last week we did the introduction with your thesis, your hook. How did that go? Yeah? Anybody want to tell about parts that were particularly difficult for them or parts that you found easier, harder?
For me, it was a little bit difficult to find how to connect the hook to the thesis.
Okay.
How to tie all that in.
To transition. So the background information we talked about, the hook being the part that gets your reader's attention, the background information being what's important about this, why does this even matter, and connecting the hook to the thesis and then the thesis. So others, did you find that difficult? Yes? Yeah. Did everybody do their thesis first and then proceed? Okay, good. Did y'all feel clearer about what it was supposed to be last week? Yes. Good. Okay, so I'm not going to start by getting into the body. We're going to start by going over a few introductions from last week, and I haven't read all these. A bunch of them just appeared here on my desk, but I've read some, and I'm going to, for the sake of saving time, I'm probably going to just pick the short ones, and we'll just read through a few. I won't give any names, and let's comment on them. Okay, so I'm going to just read out loud, and I want y'all to listen. We'll read over the checklist again just to call it all to your mind, and we don't have tons of time to do this and still get to that, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I thought this will help you in grading your essays, looking at your essays and asking, does this make sense? Does it follow the patterns? And you'll be able to do more of that. In the 12th grade, of course, you still need help. You need your teachers, your mother, your advisor, their opinions on things, but at the same time, you should be doing most of the work in revising your own work, okay? You should be looking it over. I find that reading out loud what I've written helps me a tremendous amount. I hear things when I read it out loud that I do not hear when I'm just reading it quietly to myself. I think you incorporate a lot in your brain that isn't even there when you read it in your head. And then when you read it out loud, you actually hear it going back in and you go, oh, that didn't make sense. You even catch typos. Okay, so let's just briefly read over the essay introduction checklist that you all used this week. Does my introduction have a thesis? So the most important part of the introduction, does it have a thesis? And I would venture a little further and say, does the thesis follow the guideline that you were given? Okay, and we already talked about that. Does the thesis state my controlling argument or my controlling idea? I should have written controlling idea probably in that checklist, because really in the argumentative essay we would call it a controlling argument, but I think a more broad term would be the controlling idea, which is your opinion about your subject, okay? So does my thesis state my controlling idea? Is there only one controlling idea, or did I get branched out into multiple things that I'm not going to really talk about? Does the thesis state at least 3 supporting arguments or ideas? Did I list my supporting arguments in the order in which I will discuss them in the essay? Is my thesis in the final 2 lines of my introduction? Does my introduction contain a hook? Is my hook compelling? Is it applicable to my reader? In other words, if I'm writing to kindergartners, is the way I introduced my topic going to interest them? Or if I'm writing to my grandmother, it makes a difference who you're writing to. Did I use a question, an unexpected statement, a shocking statement, a metaphor, a compelling quote, or a story as my hook? Did I check my mechanics, spelling, punctuation, and grammar? Okay, so y'all listen for that. I wished I had had all of you bring your checklist to follow along. But we'll just start by reading a couple of these, and then I'm going to ask you first, and then I'll give my opinions. How about it? It's a lot easier to grade someone else's writing than your own. So it's actually worth getting someone else's opinion, even a friend, to say, hey, Can I read you my introduction and see if you think I did everything? Okay. If the sun was just 10% closer to the earth would burn up, and if it was the same amount away from it, the earth would freeze. Psalm 19, 1 through 2 says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Day unto day utters speech, and night unto night reveals knowledge." So if the Bible says the firmament reveals knowledge, by looking at this example, we can see that just like the sun has its place in the orbit of all the planets, and just a minor fraction of distance can cause major trouble and death, so is relationships between those God has put in our life. If we choose to transgress the boundaries and limitation God has placed in our lives, not only will we be affected by this decision, but like the earth to the sun, a life of peace and a living relationship with God would be impossible. If we choose to live in the confusion of Babylon, transgress the place God has intended for us, and don't allow the people God has put in our lives to bring us back into order, we will be no better than a wandering star crashing around out of our place to dissipate into randomness. Okay, so does it have a good hook? Does anyone think it doesn't have a good hook? Raise your hand if you think it doesn't. Okay, so we all agree it has a good hook. Does it give background information? Okay, good. And someone define what the background information is in that?
The sun.
About the sun? Okay, yes. So it's bringing a comparison between the solar system and the orbits of the planets around the sun to the orbits of relationship. Okay. Does it have a thesis, a clear thesis?
Or was it clear? I couldn't tell where it was if it did.
Okay. Does anybody disagree with that? Did you hear the thesis? Okay, let's just read it. So it's supposed to be in the last two sentences. So let's just read the last two sentences, okay? If we choose to transgress the boundaries and limitations God has placed in our lives, not only will we be affected by this decision, but like the earth to the sun, a life of peace and a living relationship with God would be impossible. If we choose to live in the confusion of Babylon, transgress the place God has intended for us, and don't allow the people God has put in our lives to bring us back into order, we will be no better than a wandering star crashing around out of our place to dissipate into randomness. Okay, Hosanna, so did you hear a thesis?
I think so, but it was very long, so it was kind of not super clear to me exactly.
Okay. Would others agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so how could this person clear up their thesis, make it a little cleaner? Shorten it, but how? What do you think they're trying to say? Haha, you thought you were going to just say that. What are they trying to say? Okay, so this is the problem. Y'all aren't sure what is trying to be said. I think I get it. Okay, so I'm gonna tackle this, okay? So the biggest problem with this introduction, and actually I think it's pretty good, it needs cleanup is the main thing, which we all need that, right? It needs cleanup. It needs concision. There's a few fragments in the thoughts where they're not quite completely articulated. So we need to go through every sentence. And this is part of revision. This is what your mom has probably done for you a lot over the years, and now you're getting to do it for yourself. But you go through every sentence and you ask, is that the clearest way that I could say that? Does that sentence have a beginning and an end? Okay? And that's one of the things. But the thesis to me, do you remember when I talked about the general thesis to get it down to one simple controlling idea? Okay? This has two controlling ideas. That's your biggest problem, is there's two controlling ideas going on here. If we choose to transgress the boundaries and limitation God has placed in our lives, not only will we be affected by this decision, but like the earth to the sun, a life of peace and a living relationship with God would be impossible. If we choose to live in the confusion of Babylon, transgress the place God has intended for us, and don't allow the people God has put in our lives to bring us back into order, we will be no better than a wandering star crashing around out of our place to dissipate in randomness. Those are all good thoughts. Those all need to be in this essay, but you got to place one thing above all the rest, okay? And I'm not sure which one is in the supreme position as being the general thesis. Okay, so it seems like if we transgress the boundaries and limitations, others are going to be affected by our decision. But also a relationship with God is going to be impossible. But then also, if we live in Babylon, we are going to transgress the place God has intended for us. And if we don't allow the people God has put in our lives to bring us back in order, we'll be no better than a wandering star. And then we will also dissipate into randomness. Now, these are all connected, and there is a way to do it. And this is why I said, and none of y'all actually did this that I have seen anyway. Do you remember how I told you to set up your thesis?
Yes. He said to write it in bold and to put what's it called?
A colon after your
topics after that.
Yes, after your general thesis, okay? I said to write it in bold, okay? So if I was to take that and say, I'm going to just make this a little different, okay? If we transgress the boundaries of relationship designed by God, or we could say the orbit instead of the boundaries, okay? Whatever you choose, we'll say orbit. If we transgress the order of relationship designed by God, well, I just want to stick to at least one of these. A living relationship with God becomes impossible. Okay? So that would be our general thesis. If we transgress the orbit of relationship designed by God, a living relationship with God becomes impossible. That's what I took out of it, okay? Does that seem fair? Okay, but she has these other things which can become her supporting argument, but there's more than 3 here. So that tells me we either have more than 3 topics or we have more than one controlling idea, okay? And that's the confusion. Does that make sense to everybody? I think this is a very common problem, so I think this is actually a good one, even though I had not fully read this yet. I think it's actually a very good one to talk about because I see this a lot. So it's because this was a complicated book. It had a lot of information in it. But this is where getting that general thesis down and putting your colon there. So now what do we do? Okay, so now we still have to talk about others being affected by our decision. And this can be swapped around. If this person feels like that wasn't actually the most important thing that she was trying to say in her thesis, then we can change it around. There's a number of ways this can be done, and I don't know what's going to follow in the body, but this is just a possibility. So we have the topic of that others are going to be affected by our decision. That living in the confusion of Babylon will have an impact on our ability to do this. If we don't allow other people that God has put put in our lives to have input, we will not have an orbit. We will become a wandering star crashing out of our place, and we will dissipate into randomness. So there's 5 things going on here. So we need to pick 3 of those, and we need to decide what we feel like is the most going to prove that a relationship with God is not possible outside of the design of relationships. So I think the fact that realizing there's given relationships and that they are affected when we don't honor where we are and where we fit in those relationships is certainly one that I would use, right? Does that seem agreeable to everyone? And then some of these things can become details to that instead of being the supporting argument. Okay, so to me, the wandering star and randomness can directly tie into that. So if you state it all in your thesis, people get confused. What are you going to talk about? What's the main point, and how are you going to prove it? So to me, I would say probably other people being affected is a big one. Allowing the input of others is a big one. And having no meaning in your life is a big one. Maybe the whole Babylon thing is another topic altogether, but it might be a detail. Okay? Does that help you guys to clear things up a little bit? Okay. All right. And I like the hook. I think it's a good hook. I like the scripture in there too, getting us started off with the Word of God. Shall we read another one? Okay. So this one, let me just ask you something. Do you remember how we talked about what kinds of hooks there were? What would you say this one is? If the sun was 10% closer to the earth would burn up. And if it was the same amount away from it, the earth would freeze.
Interesting facts.
Interesting facts. Good. All right. How could one young couple's decision to move from the plains of Texas to the slums of New York City influence the lives of thousands of people? If it weren't for that one seemingly small choice, who knows where I would be today? The theory of quantum physics states that when we choose to do something, the whole universe readjusts to our new position, even in anticipation of our decision. That is, before we even make the decision. Thus, every moment of our lives, in everything we say or do, or don't say or do, we are making choices, and those choices are continually transforming a host of possibilities into definite outcomes that will influence our own life and the lives of those around us. And that's a quote. When we take a step towards the place God has for us, that choice has the potential to affect many things. It changes us, the lives of others, and even the world around us. This reality is true for positive decisions as well as negative. And by the way, he did put a colon and the general and topics. Okay, didn't highlight it, but it's nice for us who are grading or reading to see the thesis highlighted, because then we can clearly know what you thought was your thesis. Okay, so does it have a hook? Is it a compelling hook? Anybody disagree? Does it have only one controlling idea? Okay, does the thesis state at least 3 supporting arguments? I'll read back over the thesis. When we take a step towards the place God has for us, that choice has the potential to affect many things. It changes us, the lives of others, and even the world around us. Does the thesis state at least 3 supporting arguments?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. We don't know if he listed them in the order he's going to talk about them because we don't have the body here yet. The thesis is in the final 2 lines of the introduction. Does the introduction contain a hook? I already said that. The hook compelling. Is it applicable to the reader? We don't know who the target audience is, so that's kind of irrelevant for us. Did they use a question, an unexpected statement, a shocking statement, a metaphor, or a compelling quote or story for the hook?
Yes.
What? Which one?
The story of going to New York.
Yep, exactly. Okay, So you all feel like this introduction followed the pattern. Good, I do too. Very nice. Okay, should we do one more and then we'll move on? Okay. Is an order for human relationships important? It is, just as the sun plays a critical role in the order of the universe. If the sun was a fraction further from the earth, all life would freeze. If it were a fraction closer, everything would burn up. So even in a broader sense, order is a necessity. It is imperative to stay in our proper orbit in order to sustain God's ordered design of relationships. In order to do this, we must know what our place is, submit to the boundaries God has given, and recognize the living order of relationships God has created. Okay. Does it contain a thesis? Yes. Anyone disagree with that? No. Does it have a hook? A compelling hook? Anyone disagree with that? Does it have only one controlling idea and 3 supporting arguments? Yes? Good. Okay. Okay, I like this too, but there's the one thing I would work on. Let's just read it one more time if you don't mind. Is an order for human relationships important? It is, just as the sun plays a critical role in the order of the universe. If the sun was a fraction further from the earth, all life would freeze. If it were a fraction closer, everything would burn up. So even in a broader sense, order is a necessity. It is imperative to stay in our proper orbit in order to sustain God's ordered design of relationships. Okay, so to me, the weakest point here is your background information that's connecting, just what Elias said was the hardest thing for him, connecting the two together. It's good, it's not bad, but I would make it a little bit clearer because this pattern of there being a design and an order applies to everything in the universe, down to every cell in your body, or you would die, okay? So it's just not to say so even in a broader sense. It makes it sound like it's somewhat applicable across the board, but it's absolutely the only way that life can survive in every sphere of the universe, okay? So why would humans be exempt? So just make that a little bit clearer. And then it is imperative to stay in our proper orbit in order to sustain God's ordered design of relationships. So there's your general thesis right there, and it's really clear, nice. In order to do this, we must know what our place is, submit to the boundaries God has given, and recognize the living order of relationships God has created. Okay, good. Make your background a little more specific and a little bit more tying them together of just how incredibly important it is. Okay, so I'm sorry if I didn't get to yours, but I kind of I thought doing at least 3 would be helpful to y'all because they'd be very different, and so I chose the shorter ones because they'll go faster. All right, not because of any other reason. Okay, so let's talk about the next step for your essay. So we have our introductions. Go back over your introductions, bearing in mind what we talked about today. Make sure you only have one very clear thesis, that you can eliminate all of your supporting arguments and you still know what you're going to talk about, okay? And then add them in very specifically. Okay, so now we'll move on to the body. And to be completely honest, once I've got a thesis, I feel that the hardest part for me is over, okay? So this is the easier part. That may not be true for you, I don't know, but that's the way I feel about it. Okay, so the first thing I like to do is brainstorm. So take, for instance, my thesis, and take each one. You remember we talked about brainstorming last time, didn't we? Yeah. Take each one and How orbiting changes us would be one, okay? Let's say orbit, and it'll have to be clearer than that in your topic sentence, but orbit changes us. So we're talking about orbiting in the proper relationship. Okay, so that was one of the supporting arguments in one of these. So orbit changes us. Okay, so everybody tell me, how does it change us? How coming into a proper orbit in the relationships God's put in our lives, recognizing what it is we're revolving around in each different situation, okay? In your home, you may be revolving around certain relationships. At your workplace, it may be different. When you go work on the farm with Brother Grady, but there is a design of how this works, or we have some chaos. Is that true? Okay. So think about it like that. And that may not be how this person is thinking about it, but that's how we're going to do it for this. How does it change you to know that you have to be in this kind of relationship? Good question, no? How are you changed by this? By always being aware that there's a system here, there's a design here, and I've got to find my orbit so that I'm always coming back around the sun, or I'm going to freeze and all life is going to end. Dissipation and chaos. I'm using y'all's words, right? Okay, so what happens? How does it change you?
You're no longer self-centered.
Exactly. That's great. No longer self-centered. Okay, great. So, you see how we did this last time about the whole thing, didn't we? Okay, give me another one.
Gives us some meaning, something to orbit around.
Yes, gives meaning. That's how I would do it, for me, when I was doing it. Okay, what else? How about an example? A story of your own life. You know a situation that that you participated in that utterly changed you. That would be important, okay? So we'll just pretend like it's working with Brother Grady, okay? Working with Brother Grady. Okay. What about a scripture? You see where I'm going with this? Okay. So that's what I want you to do first. You know your 3 topics already if you've done your introduction. So you know your 3 topics. So I want you to brainstorm over each one like this. And I want you to come up with some things. So the body of your essay needs to contain at least 3 topics. So over each one, you brainstorm first. Then you're going to open each topic. You're going to write it almost as if it's another miniature, it's just a miniature essay in and of itself, okay? So you're going to open each one with your topic sentence. Y'all are all familiar with topic sentences, all right? But we want this topic sentence to be sure that it identifies the purpose of your paragraph, of your topic. What am I going to talk about, okay? Finding an orbit in relationships will utterly change your life. Speak it with authority, okay? That's what I'm talking about. How finding my orbit in relationships changes my life, okay? And you can do it in the first person, the third person, whatever, the general people, but that's what it needs to do. It identifies very clearly what you're going to talk about. Now, you're not going to list your 3 supporting arguments as you did in your thesis, but you're really giving a general thesis, are you not? So, finding orbit in relationships changes us, okay? So that would identify the purpose of the paragraph. Then you're going to give evidence and interpret the evidence, okay? So how do we give this evidence? Okay, you all are what, 17 and 18 years old. Your word doesn't carry tons of weight just yet, okay? But that's where history, people who know things, your parents, your grandparents, all of these things can help prove the things that you already feel strongly about. So give evidence. These are the ways you can give evidence. Studies and statistics. Okay? So there are plenty in that book. There may be other places. How are people changed when they have communities? Because a community has an orbit, does it not? The small town used to. That's why we call ourselves an intentional community. We've got to have something that we orbit around, a purpose, a calling, a vision, someone, God in heaven, right? And then there's all these smaller orbits that it breaks down into, the families and the marriages and the work on the farm and the music and the choir. And these are all orbiting somewhere. And as soon as somebody gets out and says, I hate your ideas, Brother Josiah. I think I'll direct the choir tonight. We're going to have some chaos, aren't we? Yeah, okay. So there's an orbit everywhere. And the more that we recognize it and the more precise it is, the better that life functions. Okay, so we can give statistics about how relationships thrive in communities, or any number of things. But we can give quotes or paraphrase from the book. When you give a quote, if it's directly from the book or some other source, you must put it in quotes, and you must also footnote that your references. The same with paraphrase. It doesn't have to be in quotes, but you do need to footnote. And so you will be docked if you don't do that. Real life examples is another way to give evidence. What were relationships like prior to finding an orbit and a center around which to revolve? Okay? What does it look like? Real life examples. Data from interviews. You know of somebody here that you feel like they have that strong central core around which they orbit, and they came from a dissipated life beforehand. Interview them. Write some of their story as part of your supporting evidence. So in this particular essay, essays take on slightly different forms. They're all pretty similar, but in this particular one, I'm not asking you to do all of these things, but I'm asking you to pick at least one and preferably two ways of giving supporting evidence, okay? Studies, statistics is one, quotes, paraphrase. So if you need to write this down, write it down. So you pick two of these and put them in your topic, okay? So you've got that first topic sentence, which is like your little general thesis for your topic, and then you give your evidence and interpret the evidence, okay? So what I mean when I say that is a lot of times I get essays, especially young people who are just starting in it, and there's a lot of jargon in it that they have picked up from the literature, or there's a lot of quotes that feel very random and like we just threw the puzzle pieces at the wall. And I don't see how this relates to their main topic. And it's just like they put a topic sentence more or less, and then there's all these quotes and a scripture, and then there's a clincher. And I don't want it like that at all. That's horrible. I want to hear you. And once again, we talked about what impacted you in this book, what impacted you in the class. I want you to keep coming back around in your thought patterns. What changed me by reading this book and attending this class? And I want you to show me why you picked this story as your supporting evidence or this quote. So if you give a quote, you have to say what you thought about that quote and how it relates to your topic, okay? So if there's no interpretation of the evidence, you will be docked, okay? It's in your checklist, it's in your scoring rubric that your teacher will look at, okay? And then finally, you conclude your paragraph with the clincher, which is a reflection of your topic sentence and consequence of the evidence, okay? Where are we going with all this evidence? Okay, you're in the 12th grade, you can do that. What's the consequence of the evidence that you have come up with? So those are the two things that the final sentence or two of this topic should contain. And finally, your conclusion. So the conclusion has 3 parts as well. I'm going to use my paper because I can see this. And I didn't write everything on here because I ran out of space. But it has 3 parts. A, you restate the thesis in different words. Do not write the thesis down again, okay? You can use synonyms. You can restate it in different words. But you restate the thesis in different words. You summarize your most important idea in the essay, okay? What you felt like brought your message home. If your thesis was that not having an orbit in relationships makes a relationship with God impossible, then you need to come back and give your strongest evidence that supports that idea. What was the most important thing that I feel like proves that idea? And that's not the restating part. That's what was the most important thing that you saw through writing that essay that proves that idea. And your final thought. Okay, so what is the final thought? The final thought is a prediction about the future, a call to action, advice, or suggestion, or making a connection back to your hook. Okay, so that would be your final thought. So those 3 things: restate the thesis in different words, summarize your most important idea, and your final thought, which is a prediction about the future. If people don't pay heed to this, well, why was this important to you? What's going to happen in the future? That, or a call to action. What can we do to make this happen? What can we do to bring relationships into orbit? Or making a connection back to your hook. If you had a really powerful hook, say about the sun and the orbits and all life, something like that. Do not, in your conclusion, there's 3 things that I do not want you to do. Do not copy sentences from other parts of your essay. That's cheating. You have to keep thinking of new ways to say things that bring it home. Do not introduce new ideas that we haven't been talking about in the essay, and everybody's going to go, what? Okay, that was profound, but I thought we were talking about orbit, and now we're talking about hurricanes. No, let's not do that. And do not belabor your points. Be concise. So generally, your conclusion should be about 3 to 6 sentences, okay? So think in those realms when you're writing it. Okay, so any questions about that?
I was going to ask about if you can use examples, like I was trying to, because I know some types of essays, they don't want first person, and so I was trying to figure out what is that, what can we use in terms of examples?
So in general, I would prefer you not to make the whole essay in the first person, because it tends to sound more like a response paper, a reaction paper. But if you are giving a little anecdote, you can give a first person anecdote. For instance, when I was 10, we moved to such and such, and then switch back into that more the third person. Okay? Shall we stick with that? These rules about first person and third person are usually up to the teacher, what they're wanting. If they're wanting it to lean more toward a response paper, or more something you can hang up on the wall, or study, to have the feel of a study, things like that. It's depending on what kind of feel you're wanting. But if you are just using it as an anecdote, that you're switching into a certain tone, and even when you're formatting your paper, you might think, so say you're going out to the edges, then you kind of have an inset paragraph. That will help to set it apart. Think a lot about your formatting. Please do. Put introduction in bold with a colon, and write your introduction. It helps the people who are grading your papers reading it. It helps any of your reader to understand more clearly if you will be very clear. When you get to your first topic, don't just say topic 1 or just move right into it. Go ahead and title each of your topics. I think you'll gain perks with your grader. Title each of your topics. Even if it's the same thing as your topic sentence, in bold, do that. Make spaces between each section. Highlight your thesis and do it like I said with the colon and then the 3 supporting arguments. And your conclusion, say conclusion in bold, and then finish it. And be sure to put in your footnotes, your references, all of that. And it tells how to do that in Mastering Words. There's a whole section that tells you exactly how to do it, what to italicize, where to put the commas, everything. So there's no excuse. Okay. And I have a few things for you before we dismiss. Okay. I'm going to just go over this with you first before I give it to you. This is how I want you to do this because I want you to learn to work in time constraints. So, day 1, brainstorm for 15 minutes on topic 1. Write topic 1 for 20 to 45 minutes, no more than 45. If you brainstorm correctly and you go ahead and put like page such and such for your quote right there, you can do that. Wrap up your topic at 45 minutes. Check your topic against the checklist for 5 more minutes. Day 2, brainstorm for 15 minutes on topic 2. It's all the same stuff. Day 3 is the same thing. Day 4, write your conclusion for 20 minutes. Check your conclusion against the checklist. Check over your entire essay. Make sure you have references and footnotes. Revise, read out loud, and title your essay. Questions? Does that feel within reach to you? Good. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.